This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest today, and that is Nick Chandler. Nick, how you doing today?
Hello. I'm doing great. How's everything going your end?
Doing pretty good. My son is taking a nap, fortunately. My daughter will probably be bursting in at some point, but right now she seems to be occupying herself. So fingers crossed that she stays that way.
Yeah, so I mean you're probably what, middle of the day, evening times where you are. I'm literally half past 6 in the morning.
Yeah, it's
So
3:30 in the afternoon here.
oh wow. Oh, to be 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, it's usually when most of the guests that I have on either this show or my other show, they tend to be based in the States, so it's usually like morning recording. So usually I'm more in your position and the other people are in my position.
Oh, so well, I'm glad you've got a good time of day for this one today.
Mm.
I think you're gonna need it a little bit. Although I think my sleep depravity might help with kind of talking about how weird this movie is.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. But we'll get to that. Before we get too much into that, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
So yeah, I write for my own site, Super My Vision. Just articles on there, just kind of redoing essays that I wrote when for my film studies masters, bachelors, but also kind of just trying to do lengthy more lengthier think pieces. I wrote a thing on Michael Mann's Ferrari, which is fast becoming one of the movies I'm obsessed with the most at the moment. I'm also podcast co-host of the Keen Atomic movie podcast, which I do with my co-host Danny Villu, film starring Danny Villu, where we take two movies, one typically from classical era Hollywood, one for more newer kind of blockbuster age,
Hmm.
linked by a general theme, and we kind of see how those movies compare. We are coming towards the close of our fourth season, coming up towards our 100th episode. And yeah, I think the most recent episode we've had recorded, not released yet, but recorded is uh was The Women star no, not wasn't The Women, it was The Divorcee starring Norma Shearer. Get my Norma Shearer movies mixed up. The Divorcee starring Norma Shearer, we paired that with Richard Linklater's Before Midnight, because we've covered the other two before movies on the podcast because
Hmm.
Danny hadn't seen them before. So we wanted to kind of close up season four, towards the end of season four, talking about the last of the Before trilogy. So yeah, that's what I do. I'm also a budding filmmaker. I have a short film in post production at the moment called Look Ahead, which I shot in Edinburgh, where I currently live, and hopefully that will be released in the next few weeks. I'm currently working on whatever it is I'm going to be doing next, because it
Okay,
never
cool.
stops creative.
Yeah. So by the time people hear this, so we record way in advance. We're recording here in February, and this when by the time people are listening to this though, it'll probably be the summer, so they should be able to go and find that movie when it comes out. So please make sure to check the show notes where we'll find links for that, and you guys can go check that out.
Yeah, we should. I mean, by that time, we would have been onto our 100th episode with Keen Atomic. We would have had that all released. I suppose I can, tell you what the season finale is and just look out for that because I'm really looking forward to that. It's Ernst Lubitsch is The Smiling Lieutenant, which is one of the few Lubitsch's I've not seen, and paired it with Joe Dante's masterpiece, Gremlins 2: A New Batch,
I love
which
that movie.
I've somehow managed to convince Danny to have it for the last episode of season four. We've also have a special on Japanese movies, because Danny's familiarity with movies from Japan isn't actually as like wide range. I don't say mine is wide ranging, but it's certainly a bit more wide ranging than hers. So we got an episode, a special episode on that, which we talk about 4 movies. Trying to still make up my mind which Godzilla movie to talk about, whether it's going to be the 54, the 2016 Shin Godzilla, or the most recent one, because that one was certainly something else.
Yeah, I mean the most recent one. I haven't gotten to see -0 yet because obviously since I'm in Japan, it's only available in with no subtitles in the theater right now. So I've got to wait until it hits home video release. But so I haven't seen that one yet. Although of those two, of the original and Shin Godzilla, I mean that's a tough choice. They're both very good. And when I teach them in my class, you always have to like try and think like, do I want to go with the original one? Do I want to teach Shin Godzilla? And it's a difficult choice that I struggle with every year because they're both so good.
Yeah, I mean, we'd said that the other few movies we've got Shoplifters, which
Oh, that's
is
one of my favorite. Yeah, one of my favorites.
wonderful little movie that I would love to talk about. The other one is Tokyo Story.
Also good one. In fact, the last episode that we just recorded was on Pulse, which is also wait, no, not Tokyo Story. I was sorry, I was getting it mixed up with Tokyo Sonata. But yeah, Tokyo Story, also very good movie. Yes.
Yeah. And because I like to throw Danny into the deep end and she has no idea what's coming, I'm gonna be showing her Shinya Tsukamoto's Tetsuo the Iron Man. Because that is a piece of cinema which I think everybody needs to watch at least once.
Yeah. And I think of those movies you mentioned, I think we have covered all of those on the show. So if you're trying to struggle between either the original Godzilla or Shin Godzilla, you might want to go back and listen to the episodes that we did on them because I went pretty in depth on we went pretty in depth on both of those movies. So maybe that'll give you some maybe that'll help you break the difference.
Was this I'm trying to think about what would be the best kind of like 4 movies for me that I would like to talk about. I mean, I've been flitting between Shoplifters and Audition, because that's another movie which she would have no idea what's coming. By this time, hopefully you would be able to listen to those reactions about what she thought of that. I mean, one of my favorite episodes we ever recorded was on Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, a movie which she had literally no idea what was going on, and she said it's probably the best movie she'll never watch again. So I think Audition hopefully will be another.
You know what you might want to do, and this is if you really want to blow her mind. Have you ever seen the movie Gozu?
No, I haven't.
Okay. You might want to check out Gozu because that is insane. And it's same director as Audition, Takashi Miike. And it's just I remember because Audition I saw, and even though it's a great movie, there's nothing that is particularly mind-blowing about it per se, at least not after. But when I saw like you can understand Audition from beginning to end. You can understand everything that happens in it. It surprises you, of course, the first time you watch it, but it's not confusing. But Gozu, I watched that in the theater, and when the movie finished, I got up, I walked like the 2 blocks to where my car was parked, got in my car, started driving. I was about like maybe 5 or 10 kilometers down the road, and then it just hit me, and I just screamed at nobody in particular. What the fuck did I just watch? It's an insane movie. So that might be one you want to try.
Okay, I'll add that to the potential list because we only I only choose 4. I might to be honest, I might actually take out Tokyo Story because she'd seen it before. The hope is just kind of show movies that she hadn't seen before. We had a whole Studio Ghibli episode planned as well, but since the time where I planned that, she's actually watched quite a few Studio Ghibli movies, so I have to kind of like dig deep in terms of what to talk about with those. So yeah, like go to I'll definitely add that to the list of potentials to see where we end up.
Yeah. But that is a nice transition since you're talking about introducing the people to Japanese movies. So what was your introduction to Japanese film?
Oh wow. it must have been when I was about 14, 15. We had this like video or DVD shop in my hometown, and I went in there like once every couple of months or something, and we had, there was a section which is, the foreign film section, and I remember seeing the cover for Battle Royale, the DVD cover, which was the Tartan Asia Extreme cover, and all it was just a silver cover, and it had Battle Royale in red writing. I finally watched it when I was about 16, 17. I remember that time I was working in college. I was at college and was able to go to this DVD shop quite frequently, and ended up coming to get to know one of the guys that worked there. And one of those benefits is being able to get, movies that I shouldn't be watching. Battle Royale, certainly one of those. And I watched it and kind of blew me away. One of my actually weirdest memories is the way my college was. We had a library, and we had these like round tables with CRT TVs around them, CRT TVs, and I was sat there. We had like a few hours free between each of our lectures. Me and my mate, well, okay, let's watch Donnie Darko, because we were kind of in a Donnie Darko frame of mind. And a couple of guys from one of my other classes decided to sit down and see CRT TV next to us, and you have your headphones. So we were watching and listening to the Donnie Darko on these headphones, and they put on Battle Royale. Basically, what ended up happening is I ended up watching Battle Royale but listening to Donnie Darko. It was quite a weird experience. But I suppose like Battle Royale was kind of my first exposure to Japanese cinema. And I remember at that same time as well, it was like Asian cinema in general. So, I probably discovered South Korean cinema through Park Chan-wook a little bit more. Bong Joon-ho, the host, came out around about that time as well. So that was kind of like more my exposure. Those two things kind of went hand in hand. Wasn't really until my late 20s where it was just like, right, it was, started going into it more, watching Audition. I think that the Tartan Asian Extreme, for a lot of British audiences in particular, is kind of like an introduction to Japanese cinema. And it's kind of just went on from there. A few years ago, I'd already seen Gojira. It was like one of those movies I watched when I was in my early 20s. So I around about 2012, 2013, when I heard about the new American remake, I was more
the legendary one.
Yes, I was more aware of the history of Godzilla, and the idea that the 1998 one was actually not a good adaptation of the character.
To say the least.
That movie is 2.5 hours long, and I was trying to figure out why me and my brother watched it so much on VHS. I think it's because it was 2.5 hours long, and me and my mum just set us down and make us and just set us and watch it, and that's why.
So I think I'm guessing you're a little bit younger than me. So how old were you when that 98 movie came out?
I was 8.
That's probably what it was, because my cousin, I think, is about the same age as you, and he was also about like 8, I think, when it came out, and he loved that movie. Like, he would watch it all the time. So I think there's something about seeing it at that age when, you're all into the whole dinosaur big monster craze type thing.
I mean, Jurassic Park was and still is one of my favorite movies. So like Godzilla, like the 98 Roland Emmerich one, really kind of tapped into that. And, me and my brother loved Jaws, as well. That was another one that was kind of on the rotation. So, the water stuff, we kind of found we weren't really aware of like how much it was bastardizing the character and how much Roland Emmerich really just didn't give a shit. So
right.
It's it's just, it was just, like I said, it was just kind of like one of those movies. So around about 2014, it was like, okay, well, let's try and start delving into the Showa stuff and start working my way through. And I only actually literally just finished my way through the series, the Godzilla stuff. So I recently watched the Reiwa anime movies.
The ones on Netflix?
Yeah, the anime ones, which means that with Godzilla -1, I've seen all the Godzilla movies now, so I have a opinion on most of them.
That's cool. Awesome.
Yeah. And Ghibli kind of formed hand in hand with that. I watched, Akira, Ghost in the Shell, Metropolis, and it wasn't well, not Metropolis. Steam Boy was one, an early one that I'd watched. We had, Sailor Moon was on Fox Kids, and so was Digimon, and loved the Digimon movie, despite the fact how bastardized the American version of that, and how much more superior the Japanese cuts is. Yeah, it's kind of just like pretty standard, I think, for British kids, really, to be introduced to this, like the anime stuff that you had on, like I said, Fox Kids on Sky over here, and then it went into like Tartan Asia Extreme and that kind of direction.
The fact that you started off with Battle Royale definitely makes you a kindred spirit. That was a movie that I had a very interesting journey with, because first time I saw it, I had seen like more extreme stuff already by that point, so it didn't really impress me that much the first time I saw it. I'm just like, it's okay. And then but I saw it with a friend of mine, and I think that was probably his first exposure to at least live action Japanese stuff. He had seen like, anime and stuff before that, but he loved it, and he went and he got like the original novel, he got the manga adaptation, and he insisted that I read the novel. And that novel, if you've ever seen it, it is big. It's a long book. So I'm like, okay, I'll try it. And I started reading it, not just expecting to read a little bit just to kind of humor him, but I got sucked into the novel because it goes. Have you ever read the book?
I haven't, no.
Okay, it is amazing. It goes in depth into it like each one of those 40 students is a well-developed, well-rounded character, and it is heartbreaking when each one of them dies. And there are lots of differences from the book and the movie. And it wasn't until years later, after I moved to Japan, that I watched the movie again. After I started, because I thought about teaching it in my class, and I'm like, well, I'm going to watch it first and kind of see if it'd be a good fit and everything like that. And knowing what I know now about modern Japanese history and politics and all that, I realized I'm like, that Battle Royale, it's now my favorite Japanese movie, because there are so many layers to that film. It's amazing. I did an episode on that where I just kind of like gushed about it for however long. That was back when I was doing solo episodes, so I think that was like, it was only like 30 minutes or so, but I just could not stop talking about how much I loved everything about that movie.
Yeah, it certainly is something else. I mean, I spent when the Hunger Games came out, I basically spent my time being like, look, okay, yeah, you like the Hunger Games, but watch this.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
And yeah, just like you too, like I was into the Tartan Asia Extreme stuff. We had those in the States as well, and that was how I built up a big portion of my Japanese movie library and Asian films in general, because that's also, I think, where I got Old Boy and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I was very into those at the time, and Arrow was another one that put out a lot of films. In fact, past season. Well, at the time of recording this, the episode just came out where we had someone who had actually worked for Arrow, talking about a movie. And yeah, they did a good job getting a lot of that stuff into English speaking countries, which does not seem to be happening as much these days, I'm afraid. Like, I'm not seeing as much. I used to have a store on the website where I tried to link to the movies, but I took it down because so many times there was a movie you wanted to talk about, and the DVD release in the States or in Europe was out of print.
Yeah, I think that this one in particular is one that's hard to find.
I think this one has been re-released by Criterion as part of their Godzilla collections, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
Yeah, I think it is on the Criterion channel, which isn't where I watched it, because over here in the UK, I'm pretty sure there isn't a UK DVD release for it.
Oh, okay, okay. So yeah, but that is a good transition into what we're talking about today, which is Dogora from 1964. The full title in Japanese, it's Uchu Daikaiju Dogora, which literally translates to Giant Space Monster Dogora. And we were talking about the original Godzilla. This is same director, Ishiro Honda, directed this one as well. Um, and we'll get into what I thought about it, but this was my first time watching this movie, so I was going in completely cold, no expectations other than A, it's a Showa era kaiju film, and B, it's directed by Ishiro Honda. That was the extent of my expectations for this movie and what I kind of knew about it. But you have some experience with this movie, I believe, right?
Yeah, so I watched the when I was going through my Showa, kind of working my way through the Godzilla movies, it's about 2018, 2019. I was kind of doing them in order, and there's on Letterboxd, there's a like a one of the kaiju lists that somebody's made where they've gone through the same sort of journey, and this one's on there, and it's sandwiched between Mothra versus Godzilla and Ghidorah the three-headed monster.
Mhm.
And so it was kind of kind of really interesting to go from those two movies, which are both really, really, really good, to this one. You go from your standard kaiju movie into something else completely. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting movie and kind of where it stands, in my opinion.
Yeah. So my reaction watching this is I had read about a little bit, so I knew about like kind of like there was this diamond heist subplot and everything. And I knew that there was this main American character, Mark Jackson, played by Robert Dunham. Um, so that stuff didn't surprise me, but watching this movie though, it felt so disjointed. I kind of feel like, and I have this is just my wild speculation here, but I kind of feel like Ishido Honda was like, I want to make a movie about, a diamond heist, and Toho is like, well, we want a giant monster in the movie too, and it's just like, okay, we'll combine them into one movie, and it feels very schizophrenic in that way.
It it is like I think disjointed. On my first viewing, it was kind of like refreshing to go from. I wouldn't say refreshing because I mean, Mothra vs Godzilla is really good, and then Ghidorah and Three-Headed Monster is actually pretty good as well. So it wouldn't say refreshing, but like the other non, I say like Atragon and a
Hmm.
couple of the other ones, they're more like standard kind of space adventure sci-fi kind of thing. So this one I kind of found to be refreshing to kind of be doing something a little bit different. And it was, on the viewing to watch it for this one, it kind of like dawned on me actually how kind of disjointed those two things together are. And I think from what I can kind of tell that, they had a from my readings anyway, they had a screenplay which involved like a had a truly alien life form, as they say, something
Hmm.
that's like really kind of weird, which is what it's a giant space jellyfish, and actually looks anything. It's completely away from the guy in the suit stuff that we've
Hmm.
had previous and since from then. So the Mark Jackson stuff, the diamond heist and all that kind of thing. From what I can tell, it comes from like the screenwriter wanting to do basically becoming obsessed with like the James Bond stuff. I mean, this is 64,
Hmm.
so we had Doctor No, you had Goldfinger at this point, so the James Bond was on the rise as a popular culture phenomenon. Really, even in over in
Hmm.
Japan, it's very 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 far reaching.
And
So it's
another Bond
understand.
connection too. You have Akiko Wakabayashi in this one, who she ends up
Yes,
playing Aki in "You Only Live Twice," which came out a few years after this.
yeah. Yeah, it's you say it's really interesting that you go from you have the kaiju thing, which Toho is very much like all in on, and then
Hmm.
they try and do something different, and I mean, I kind of see it as a case where from what I can tell, it didn't do very well. The reaction to it wasn't that great. I know Toho sent Robert Denham over to Hollywood to try and pitch more
Mhm.
movies with Mark Jackson as a character to try and bring in like American funding because he's an American actor and that failed.
Mhm.
And I kind of see this movie's failure for them to try and branch. I see it as they wanted to do something different with the kaiju idea, and it didn't work. So that kind of made them go into Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, which
Mhm.
brings back Rodan, it uh brings back Godzilla, and then it brings in arguably the greatest enemy that you ever had.
Mhm.
Um, and then it kind of sets the stage for what ended up becoming what the show series ended up becoming. Just trying to get as many monsters as possible, and
Mhm.
trying to have fun with it. I think this is, in my eyes, I see this as Toho swinging for the fences into trying to do something different and then failing and then end up doubling
Mhm.
down on something else, which is what we ended up seeing.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see some of the original ideas for this because Jojiro Okami wrote this movie and there are two things that he wanted in his original script. One, he wanted to have a more futuristic setting like he did in Battle in Outer Space and Gorath. But he also had this idea of making it more of a global film with humanity uniting together on a global scale to address a threat, which is, you know, basically the plot of Watchmen before Watchmen, decades before that comic came out. And uh or at least the fake plot of Watchmen basically. And but it just kind of the script just kind of languished at Toho for years after it was pitched in 1962, and it wasn't until 1964 that it was dusted off, and they basically just kind of excise that whole aspect of humanity uniting together. I mean, there's a little hints of that here and there, but pretty much just straight up Japanese film. And then there's the jewel heist concept was added too, which I can't find any reason why. I don't know who in Toho thought like we want to have this huge Diamond Heist James Bond esque subplot. I can't find. I don't. It doesn't say anything in the Wikipedia article about they were influenced by James Bond or anything like that. Although I imagine just with the zeitgeist of the time that had to have been an idea that was in play. Um, but the one thing that kills me is you talked about how Toho sent Robert Dunham to Hollywood to kind of pitch like a series of movies about the Mark Jackson character, and it just shows like how different the thinking of the Japanese film executives and Hollywood executives is at the time. And I think watching this now I can understand why the Hollywood executives passed on it, because I mean in Robert Dunham being in Japan, being a Japanese speaking American in Japan in the 60s, that's a hot commodity. That's you can easily get a lot of work as an actor back then doing those types of movies, because you're like one of a small handful of actors who can do that, and you don't even have to be particularly talented to do it. Um, but watching him in this movie, I just get the feel I'm just like, I wouldn't, there is no fucking way I would want to see a series of movies with this guy, because he is, I do not like this character. He just comes off as very arrogant and grating. It feels, and this is a Japan specific thing, expat in Japan specific thing, but watching him, he reminds me of like the arrogant Westerner who is pretty good at Japanese, and then he goes to Japan and he acts like he's the greatest person in the room because he's so good at Japanese.
It's like Lucas Black in Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift.
I have not
Shows
seen
up.
that movie and I refuse to, but probably.
um, yeah, I actually like Tokyo Drift. Like, it's a pretty good movie, but I kind of I've never really thought of it like that. Really, for me, I was, I think on my original letterboxd entry for this, I was like, oh, I really wish they did more movies with Mark Jackson, because it's just like like I said, I think for me, going through these movies one after the other, you end up with stock characters. You got them
Mhm.
here, the scientists. You got them here with the scientist's daughter, and you kind of
Or
end up
slash student. I was a little confused by that because at first I thought she
yeah,
was his daughter, and then later she's calling him sensei. So it's like, okay. And I looked up and
yeah,
I double checked in the cast list, and they have different surnames. So I guess it's just
must be.
teacher student. But when she's talking to the police detective in that one scene, it seems like when she's talking about her father, it seems like she's talking about the professor.
Yeah, that is pretty pretty confusing. It's, you kind of become accustomed to like the stock characters that show up. Even
Hmm.
64. The same kind of things pop up, and then even afterwards they popped up afterwards. So it was like, oh, okay, they're doing something different. We got this random character called Mark Jackson shows up. He's got a pretty cool hat, and then you throw him into a diamond heist, I wouldn't say mystery, but diamond heist movie with
Hmm.
like you said, Akiko Wakabayashi. It's like I said, it's just doing something different. I say, oh, I would love to see more movies with this character in, because he's just so different from what I expected from a kaiju movie. But I
Hmm.
suppose taking it from where you come from, where you're looking at it from an expat kind of point of view, and where America was at the time, especially with Americans going over to Japan in the 50s and 60s, I suppose it can kind of make sense.
Hmm.
I mean, I found an interview with his daughter online, and she talks about how he went over to Japan after he retired from the Marine Corps,
Hmm.
and he was a stunt driver. He was a stunt driver, and learning Japanese. And by the early 60s, he was fluent, and ended up going from stunt work into small parts and then biggest parts. And he ended up working
Hmm.
on the Green Slime, which I think is another Ishiro Honda movie.
Hmm.
He shows up in Godzilla versus Megalon as well, and then he kind of he went back over to the States in like the 70s.
Hmm.
I just sort of find his story like particularly interesting, kind of going from Marine Corps into kind of falling into the movies. Um, and he brings, I think, as an actor, I think for me he brings a certain kind of, I wouldn't say charisma is kind of the wrong kind of attitude, but like his attitude and his demeanor is much more.
Hmm.
um I don't want to say there's depth to it, but it's just different to what you see with the other Japanese actors on screen. Arguably,
Hmm.
apart from the mob characters that we see in this movie, who kind of fall into we're not taking these guys seriously because they're criminals. We shouldn't be taking criminals kind of seriously.
Hmm.
Um, you got to leave that kind of stuff to Seijun Suzuki. So yeah, I think I understand what you're talking about with Mark Jackson, where he came from, for you, what he means for
Hmm.
you. But for me, I just don't have that context. For me, I was like, oh, I would actually like to see more movies with this character.
Well, I can also understand your context too, because like you said, you watch this movie in the midst of like a kaiju, deep dive. So after seeing so many movies with like the same types of characters over and over again, seeing someone like Mark Jackson in one of these films would be something and the whole Diamond Heist thing is going to be something completely different. So that's going to be a lot more intriguing. Whereas me, I don't. Not only do I have more of the context from the expat immigrant point of view, but I also don't have that same kaiju context as well, because the only like all the way through I've only seen the original Godzilla and Shin Godzilla of the Japanese films, and and now Dogora, and I saw part of little bits and pieces here and there of, I think it was not Son of Godzilla, but one of the other very early sequels. And it might have been Son of Godzilla now that I think about it. But so I don't have that same context of like being like, it's the same characters, it's the same type of thing over and over again. So that also gives a different perspective of it as well. Another thing too you
I mean,
mentioned. I mean, think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. You carry on. Carry on.
Well, I was just gonna say that you talked about Robert Dunham's life story, and I had when I was watching this, I did kind of like go down a little bit of a rabbit hole and like read up on him, um and yeah, he does have a very interesting life story. I mean, he was he had gone over to he was stationed in Yokohama in the Marine Corps, and he was he served there for 2 years, and then he went back to the States, and he missed being in Japan, so he got a divorce, went back to Japan. He went learned Japanese through a correspondence school, um and he even had a very successful import export business with importing exporting shoes, I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly. And then yeah, like you said, he became a stunt driver, and then later, because he was one of the few Westerners in Japanese movies who could speak English, or who could speak Japanese, and pretty decently. Like, his command of Japanese is very good, and so he ended up, becoming an actor. And unlike most Western actors who did appear in Japanese films at the time, his voice did not have to be overdubbed by a Japanese actor. That was something that happened with a lot of those movies, is whenever they would have a Western actor in these movies, um, they would dub his voice over. And that's not something they ever had to do with Dunham, which is how he was able to get so much work. And he had uh he got around too romantically. He had his ex-wife in America. He had two different wives in Japan. Both One of them, his first wife, they had two kids. I think that was the one you mentioned where she gave the interview, Barbara Ann uh Subayashi. And then they divorced, and he ended up marrying a model and had two children with her. And then they moved back to the US in the 70s because his work was drying up. And he also admitted to having a torrid love affair with Linda Miller. So he definitely had a interesting interesting experiences back then.
Yeah, the interview was with Amiko Jade Frost.
Oh, okay, so
So
that was from his third wife.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was a 2010 interview. I'll send send you the link for this for you to have in the show notes. But like to kind of go into a little bit, like, so when I was watching all these movies kind of back to back almost, it was, you kind of like looking out for what's making each one of these kind of different.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's probably why I'm a little bit more negative on the Showa series, really, than a
Mhm.
lot of other people, because it just kind of ends up devolving into like the same thing over and over again. And I kind of
Right.
just kind of looking for something a little bit different. So when the Godzilla movies fall into the high size series, that's for me, it's just like, oh wow, this is like truly going a bit bonkers. I mean, Godzilla
Mhm.
King Ghidorah, like, that's a time travel movie, and it literally rips from
Mhm.
like Back to the Future, Terminator. It goes into World War II at one point. It's truly bonkers. And then you get something like Godzilla versus Biollante, which is arguably one of the top five Godzilla movies because of the monster design of Biollante is utterly incredible. And those series, those Godzilla Heist movies, like, they're, that's my favorite of the suits that they had. And they truly just go wild with the ideas because they're drawing from Hollywood trends at the time. Godzilla King Ghidorah came out in 1991, so this is like post Back to the Future. It's Terminator come out, well, the first one. Time travel movies were kind of like a big thing. Yeah, so like the Terminator came out in '84. Back to the Future was, Back to the Future. You had those movies are insanely popular, and the third
Mhm.
one had been out at that point. So, you know, very much like Dogora, they took the popular Hollywood trend and trying to bring it to what they're kind of
Mhm.
doing, just to kind of like make things, I don't know, say, more interesting and more appealing to foreign audiences. I don't think that's the case with the 64 Dogora. I don't think their intention was to say, right, James Bond movies are popular. We're going to do a James Bond movie because we want this to translate over in the States. Don't think that's the case.
Right.
I literally just think it's them just saying, oh, we want to do a James Bond heist thing because that's popular and because we want to have a go at doing it. Whereas like you compare it with the high size stuff, and it's very much trying to follow, right, we need to get this movie translated over to the States. As and our interpretation of it as well, I think, personally.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, they probably had this impression that because when the original Godzilla was released in the States, they had inserted all this extra footage with Raymond Burr to try and make it appeal to Western audiences, because Western audiences aren't going to watch a movie with unless there's a white guy as the main actor of it. So they edit him into all these scenes and stuff like that. But with this one, they didn't have to worry about any of that because they had a Westerner already in there as basically the main character. So they probably figured that, well, Godzilla was very successful when they edited in Raymond Burr, so maybe Dogora will be very successful when we put in a Western actor of our own. And because he's our actor, and because we love him so much, then he's going to be very popular in America. And we're going to a whole series of Hollywood films with him. And it didn't end up working out that way.
No, arguably hindsight, you're probably thinking that's probably a good thing. Because
at least I am. From your perspective, you enjoyed him, so maybe you have a different view of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's kind of a good thing because, like I said, my interpretation is of how this movie was received that they ended up doubling down on, Ghidorah, a three-headed monster, and it was kind of going on from there.
Although one of the interesting things, though, is that because Robert Dunham mostly spoke Japanese in this, his voice was dubbed over in English by a different actor too.
Yeah.
So not only did he not get his series of Mark Jackson films, but he didn't even get to overdub himself.
Yeah, that's a bit of a shame. I mean, the movie. So the movie is like really, really disjointed, and it like, especially on this viewing, it kind of caught me how, I don't want to say dull, but wasn't as intriguing as I remember it being on when I first watched it. And I think I said, there's a lot to do with the context I watched it the first time, whereas this time it was very much like a solo one-off. And I've come from watching all the Millennium movies and into the Raya series, so you come to have an expectation of what a Godzilla movie should look like, and then by extension, what a kaiju movie should look like. And I think Dogora is admirable. Yeah. It's admirable in its in what it tries to do, but overall as a film, I don't think it really doesn't work and doesn't pull together. And I don't think that's the fault of someone like Robert Dunham, and I don't think that's the fault of someone like Akiko Wakabayashi, because I think those two performances are the two most interesting in the movie. I don't think Ishiro Honda is doing anything spectacularly with the camera. And it just kind of all feels very quite serviceable. I think Akira Ikafube's score is not memorable, which is quite damning, really, for someone like him. I mean, his music in the kaiju movies and the show era are really some of the highlights. Even when the movie's really not that great, his music really kind of stands out. This one here, it kind of just doesn't.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot of that. I mean, it's not the fault of anyone necessarily. I mean, I think especially Wakabayashi, I mean, I think she was the brightest spot for me in this. I really enjoyed her performance, and I could see why after someone watched her in this movie, they thought that she would be a good fit for You Only Live Twice. In fact, when I put it up on Letterboxd, I actually gave it an extra half star just because of her in it, because she's fun in the movie. She looks great. She looks amazing, in fact. And she's one of the most interesting parts of this movie. And Dunham, as much as I don't like him, I will say that the movie does become a little bit more interesting when he is on screen, even though I've got my own personal prejudices about how his character comes off, he does make it more interesting. Like, even though I hate him, at least I've got something that makes me pay attention a little bit more.
Yeah, the thing with the movie is that the characters, apart from, as I said, Robert Dunham and Akiko, they just don't stand out. I mean, Robert Dunham for good or worse, but even the mob characters just don't really stand out. They just seem very, very stock. And you kind of, as an audience member, think, oh, Honda isn't taking these characters seriously, so why should we? So there isn't really any threat to them.
Yeah,
it just
there's
seems very, very
no
comical
one
in that 60s kind of way.
exactly, and there's no one as memorable as like Serizawa from the original Godzilla or anything like that. And there's just and you're right, it's just a lot of stock characters. Like, you've got, Dr. Munakata, who is, basically filling out the role that the professor did in the first Godzilla movie, but is nowhere near the actor that guy is. So it's just and I'm blanking on his name right now. I'm gonna feel like such an idiot when I go back and I look and remember. But I will say this, though. I mean, one of the things that actually I did find pretty impressive was, I know that you had mentioned that they'd done something different with the monster design here, where it's like this kind of giant jellyfish type thing. And it wasn't, a guy in a costume. And it was, they had a lot of trouble designing that creature. They had this, they'd used soft vinyl to make him, and they made this mold that ended up being very expensive. Um, but it was very difficult to kind of control. I will say, though, that is one of the things that does set this movie apart from other kaiju films. Is that creature design is very unique. And aside from things like, when the tentacles come and they grab the bridge, when it look, and that one, you can really see the seams in that scene. But other than that, I thought the design of Dogora was actually pretty effective.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, there's a book called Mushroom Clouds and Mushroom Men, by Peter H. Brothers, which I've managed to find on Google Books, and they talk about how the design of the creature, they say that constructed out of plastic and suspended upside down in water to give it the buoyant effect. And then they had wires kind of manipulating the tentacles. I think Suyabiara, he special effects designer for most of the Showa stuff. His what he's doing here, I think, is really, really interesting. And like I said, it's so much more different. And from what I can tell from where they talk about the movie, Brothers talks about this, is like they say that Suyabara loved to experiment with these new techniques, and I can imagine it's a lot more interesting for him to try something different than rather just how are we going to do another guy in a suit, but just make it a little bit different. From what I've read, they're saying that rather than having like the actors in front of like a blue screen back projection, they had them inserted via composition over the effects that was previously filmed. And it's kind of like the film, there's those special effects features, they're kind of like feeling quite they say in the book grimy and scratchy. I think it's kind of the best way to put it. And it kind of adds like a bit of texture to it and a bit of it's a bit more interesting. It doesn't feel polished, and it kind of adds to the character of it. I think from what I can tell as well, they wanted to do more sequences, of Dogoras attacking around the world, but that just didn't happen. And there's a quote I've got from Ishiro Honda. He says, "I enjoyed working on this production, although Suyabara had a hard time and may have wanted to do another kind of monster already." Monster altogether. This goes back to the issue of production costs, as the budget was obviously very small, so creating suspense is very essential. Suyabara may have wanted to do this picture on a larger scale, and if there were larger sets, it would have been much more realistic. As a result, both he and I received some criticism on this point. which kind of, like I said, I think goes back to, what ended up becoming the response to this. Is just like, why Toho looking at this, or why are we committing so much resources to a character, to a monster like this, and this film isn't very successful, when we could just have another suit and just do that.
Right,
You can
and
kind of see
also
that. You
for
kind of see the point.
at a lot less effort too, because like you were saying, you're talking about how to get this effect they had to have the prop placed in a water tank, but one of the big problems they had was the water that they had got on the day of filming was white and cloudy, so the staff had a lot of trouble keeping the tank transparent enough to shoot. So that's why they weren't really able to get that much footage, like other than that, that big sequence when Dogora comes to Earth. That's pretty much the only time you see the monster in the movie. Other than that, it's just mostly like tentacles or like these close-ups here and there, because it was just so difficult to film. And if you're Toho and you see kind of the response this film got and kind of the backlash of it and just all the effort they had to go to get it, it's very easy to say like, well, it's so much cheaper for us to just put a guy in a big rubber suit and have him, tear down a model city.
Because I could blow my nose. I mean, there's no large scale destruction in this movie. Like there is, in your other Showa movies.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones that are non-Godzilla movies, have battles with flying saucers and UFOs and what kind of have you, and it is kind of noticeable, really, that the monster doesn't really kill or injure anyone. Like there's no we should maybe think about where the monster is kind of coming from. There's no it's more of an amorphous being that has no emotional character to it. And like all the villains, like they die because of accidents. They don't die because they've done, they don't die because of incidents with the monster. It's purely out of accident.
Right. And also, I think another big issue that this film has is it's just so like you watch the original Godzilla, and Honda has a very clear message and theme he's trying to communicate there. I mean, he's talking about the dangers of war. He's talking about the dangers of nuclear power. He's criticizing the Japanese government for being so complicit and for kowtowing to the American government over what the concerns of the Japanese people are. So there's all this stuff that is kind of mixed in there. You've also got the environmental message with the professor in that talking about how that this creature is something that can teach us so much, and really we're the bad guys because we've been horning in on his territory, and now we're going to kill him because he's just defending his own territory. And there's all this kind of stuff that's at play in that, and like the scenes of like you said, the devastation, and there's not that much destruction in this movie, but you compare it to that original Godzilla film where you just have these long slow pans over the city in flames and just like utterly destroyed, and you see the people in the hospitals. I mean, that original Godzilla movie, it's a heavy movie. It's very heavy, and I think a lot of people whose image of Godzilla may come from the later Showa films, I think they'd be surprised if they go back and they sit and they watch that original version of it and they see how dark and heavy the movie is. But something like this, like I struggle to think about what kind of message Honda had in here, or even if he did have a message. I mean, this really just feels like something he was doing because, guys got to eat.
Yeah, it doesn't. It does. There's no. Yeah. So the original 54 Godzilla has this incredible, powerful message behind it, and obviously, and it's that's a whole other podcast or series of podcasts to do on that movie. I mean, King Kong versus Godzilla is a movie that's in very, very anti. It's all about commercialization, and because it's all about King Kong but getting kidnapped by a pharmaceutical company. And it's all about how, like, commercialization is a bad thing. Mothra versus Godzilla has a very, very strong environmental message to it, as whenever Mothra shows up. She's just basically what that's about. And then you got the incredibly powerful Godzilla versus Hedorah, which has a extremely strong environmental message. I mean, that monster's pretty much, I think it's a smog monster. I know some titles of the character of that movie is Godzilla versus the smog monster. It's basically
Yeah.
about toxic pollution and that coming to life. And Dogora, like, it doesn't have any. It's just an amorphous jellyfish that comes from space to steal carbon or diamonds, and there's no like overarching message. There's no I suppose in the 60s there's no ideas behind, oh, we should be looking out the earth more. It could have gone into the more
Right.
route of how we're going to look after the earth, an environmental message, but it doesn't do that. What's interesting as well, I mean, like, Dogora is, like, I think one of the more interesting designs of the Showa era.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
they've only ever brought him back a couple of times. It shows up in the anime Godzilla Planet of the Monsters in a like screenshot, basically, where it's implied that Dogora was one of the monsters that attacked the Earth, as in London, this one. And then I think it shows up in Godzilla Island, and that's it. It doesn't show up anywhere else. It's in a few video games, but it's kind of it, which is kind of it's a bit of it's a real shame, because like it's a design that is so different. You could do so much more with it rather than keep showing Gigan again, or even like Gigan, Baragon, like these other kind of characters that people want to see more of. I know Toho, they bring in these older characters back on their Godzilla Day every November, and we've had Gigan show up. There's Hedorah shown up again. I can't remember. Jet Jaguar showed up, and it's kind of think, oh, why aren't they bringing back Dogora? It's such, like I said, it's such a more interesting design, and with modern technology nowadays, you can actually, make it easier to do. But that's Toho's decision for that.
No, I think you're right. I mean, despite the negative reception this film got, despite my own negative feelings for it, I mean, I do. Again, I think the design is a good effort to do something different from the stock guy in a rubber suit, and especially now with VFX having come so far, they could really take advantage of that and maybe do something more interesting with this character, and especially the whole idea of it thriving on diamonds. I mean, there's a message there too with like all the the conflict diamonds, which probably wasn't even really known back in the 60s, but the whole idea of like how diamonds are intrinsically worthless. Basically, they only have the worth that the diamond companies say we have to put on them. There there's some interesting things that you could do with this movie, or going back to the original plan of humanity uniting together to stop this threat. That would have been more interesting too, and I feel like any of those ideas would be fodder to make a more interesting version of this movie today.
I mean, that's kind of, you can see that by the opening credits section. There's a really quite beautiful matte painting of the Earth from outer space, and you got this, the alien kind of coming towards space and ends up in Japan rather than all over the world, kind of thing. There does seem to be feel as though like there's a lot of scale kind of missing from this. At one point, I know the scientist points out that if this thing continues doing what it's doing, it's going to threaten the whole entire human race, but we don't really see the impact of that. It's yeah, it's just it's just go from the limitations at the time, really. I think for this movie, I think Toho don't have the budget to go, right, okay, we're gonna try and film a scene on a set that looks like Paris or a set that looks like New York. I can't remember. I think one of the Millennium movies, I can't remember which one it is, actually like has a scene set in New York where a guy is getting mugged in New York. and then Godzilla shows up, and it's quite really random, and it's very very stereotypical of like what the Japanese audiences think Americans like at that time. Um, so yeah, the thing that they said, the thing with Dogora, it just like it just very much feels like this is a kaiju movie of what could have been and what didn't come to pass because of it. And I think that just, like I said, for me, just makes it more of an interesting case study.
Yeah, I mean, I think the behind the scenes stuff, the fact that they were, like you said, they did try to swing for the fences, and you got to give them credit for that, for trying something different. I mean, even the fact that they decided to do a movie with a Japanese movie set in Japan with a Western actor as the headliner was something. I mean, I can't say this 100% certainty, but it seems like a, something new for the time, something unique. And I mean, you never would have seen a Hollywood movie put an Asian actor front and center at that time period. It wasn't until right the Yakuza, and where they had an Asian actor headlining something. Even that, it was only double billing because they had Robert Mitchum there too. So you got it. I think you're right. I think you do have to give it to Toho for trying something different, even if it didn't pan out. And the effort they put into it is like you said, is I think that is a more interesting story than this movie itself.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You did said that the special effects of this movie, it's yeah, it's just much more interesting than just playing with miniatures. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love seeing tiny buildings get blown up and smashed about, or UFOs on strings kind of flying through space and all that. But I don't know, there's something kind of like interesting about this, which I said it's admirable. It's admirable, and I just all I can hold for it. And the Diamond heist plot. It's just weird that that exists in this movie. It's just a really weird juxtaposition, and like you said, these things on paper sound more interesting than the actual movie actually ends up becoming. And it really kind of hurts me to say that, because like I said, when I first saw this, I was just like, oh yeah, no, this is really cool. And I spoke about it quite a lot with my film professor at the time. I was thinking, said to him that, I just watched Dogora and it's truly, truly weird. And he kind of agreed with me. Because I think he did the same kind of thing I did, where we watched, you watch the show movies kind of in order, as it were. So for me, when I get to destroy all monsters, or all monsters attack, I'm kind of burnt out by having so many monsters on screen. So when you have something like the Gora shows up, or in the 70s, yeah, Godzilla versus Hedorah in 71, I'm kind of like begging for something different to show, for Toho to go like you've got the formula here, just break away from it, subvert it a little bit, bring some commentary into it a little bit, make it more interesting. And Dogora is an example, I think, of of a failed attempt at that, and I think ended up kind of doubling down into Guy in a Suit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, the effort at trying something different, I'll give them credit for that, and it is more interesting than just kind of like relying on what would become the stock formula, and just kind of like, well, let's crank out another monster movie. And especially, and like, again, I'm coming to this, kind of secondhand because I haven't seen these movies, but my impression is that as the Showa era went on, it was really just kind of, let's pump out these monster movies because kids love them.
And that very much what they ended up becoming. Godzilla ended up translating into America through becoming a kid's character. That's
Mhm.
kind of what he ended up being. The end of Terror of Godzilla, which is the last of the Showa movies. It's that's not a good movie, and it really shows. It shows that they're kind of like just churning these out for commercialization purposes, and Godzilla is a good guy, and you think, okay, that is what 20 years, 21 years
Mhm.
after the original Gojira, and it's such a a gigantic shift in what that character ended up becoming, and it's kind of like it's a I wouldn't say a warning. It's not a warning light, but it's almost like, oh, this is what commercialization and franchising does to an idea, and to a term I hate being used nowadays, but to an intellectual property. And it kind of shows that the Showa era kind of goes down this rabbit hole of becoming Godzilla, becoming a good guy. He has a son, and King Kong shows up. It just and they're just throwing things at the wall. And it really, they took a break for a little bit. They brought it back to the Heisei era. It was just like, okay, we're going to make Godzilla like a bad guy again, so that he's, this guy's a dick, and we're going to show that and just do more, crazy things with it. And then they did the same with the Millennium series, and kind of bringing back the character to more of a monster rather than like a kid's character, because that's kind of where for me Godzilla kind of should belong, is this monster that's destroying the world rather than saving it. Or in the Legendary series he's kind of saving it, but he's not really. He's just looking out for the planet. He doesn't really give a shit about humans.
Right, it's more of like almost like kind of an anti-hero in a way.
Yeah, pretty much. And like the kaiju movies that don't feature Godzilla, and Astragon and Gorath and Mantango, they're okay, but they're not. I mean, Astragon's probably the more interesting one out of the ones I've just named. But yeah. Kaiju movies, so the show era it's very much like commercialized and goes into like, okay, we're going to make this as a kid's character. It was a cartoon at one point in the 70s, and yeah, it's only really nowadays that we kind of we're kind of understanding, okay, Godzilla should be as bad as possible. Shin Godzilla being the prime example of that, where it's this actual god creature that destroys the earth if let loose.
I said this after I saw Shin Godzilla, and also comparing it to the Legendary films. Like, one of the things the Legendary films do great is the spectacle, right? I mean, I loved King of the Monsters just because it was just full balls out monster fighting, and that's what I went to that movie to see. And and then when we watched, I was actually very disappointed in Godzilla versus Kong, because there was all this focus on these human characters that I could not give less of a shit about. But ironically enough, though, I actually am enjoying Monarch quite a bit, though, the TV show. But I think what the Legendary films do very well is they do that spectacle really good. They do a really great job of that, and I think that the Japanese films, obviously they don't have those same budgets that Legendary has, so they can't do that same degree of spectacle. I mean, Shin Godzilla, it looks amazing. They do have, it's not like it doesn't have any spectacle, and it looks great when they do. But one of the strengths of that movie is just the messages and themes are so much deeper than you get in the Legendary films. And again, I haven't seen -0 yet, but from everything I've heard, or -1. -0. I can't remember what the exact title is. -1. Thank you. I feel like yes, I feel like an idiot now. But from what I've heard from people who have seen it, is it does seem that Toho is leaning in more in that direction, where they're trying to have the actual Godzilla movies they make have deeper themes, deeper messages, since they can't do the spectacle at the same scale that Legendary is able to do.
I think even with spectacle, I think the 2014 Godzilla movie is it's a Hollywood interpretation of it, and I think the fact that Gareth Edwards is behind it really does that movie a lot of favors. It's a Hollywood interpretation of what happened with the Fukushima disaster, and then I think with Shin Godzilla is more of a Japanese interpretation of what happened with the Fukushima disaster. I mean, Godzilla 2014 actually came out. Well, yeah, Godzilla 2014. Yeah, well, that was actually before, wasn't it? It came out before. Fukushima was in 2014, wasn't it?
No, Fukushima was in 2011.
2011. Yeah, so yeah, no, then I'm correct. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
both. Yeah, I mean, I know Shin Godzilla especially.
yeah,
That was in response to Fukushima because that was one of the big things that the director was playing with, and you can see it a
Hideki
lot
Anno,
because
yeah.
because I was in Japan. I had been in Japan by like for about 3 years when that happened. So I remember that botched government response to it. I remember like the scandal with TEPCO and all that kind of bullshit. And so when I finally did see Shin Godzilla, I mean, I remember a lot of people in the West were saying like, "Oh, this is really boring." It's like all these people in board, and I was riveted with that movie because I'm just like, I completely understand. I felt like DiCaprio in that scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, always pointing at the screen. I'm like, yes, I get that. I get that.
The creature design of Shin Godzilla as well is utterly terrifying. It's probably the most terrifying version of Godzilla. And I think that's kind of what lends itself to why Godzilla has kind of stood the test of time over, since its creation in 54 is because he's able to become this kind of allegory for other things and interpretations for different things. Even, oh, dare I say it, the 1998 Godzilla movie is an interpretation of where Hollywood was at the time in 1998. I think it's a really interesting case study. The fact that Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin came to the character and just didn't give a shit, and they ended up releasing what they ended up releasing, and it took Toho what took Toho a year to be like, oh, actually, no, we need to do this right. They kind of used that as being like, actually, no, we need to do a Godzilla movie, and Godzilla 2000 Millennium is pretty good because of that. And then when you finally get into Godzilla Final Wars, you're just like, oh wow, this is actually something truly bonkers. Um, I think it's kind of like the kaiju Toho stuff. I think for it to work really well for me anyway, I think there needs to be an element of allegory in it. It is really satisfying to have that spectacle. I do like Godzilla King of the Monsters really well. I think the allegory in that is really heavy-handed because it is all about like, oh, we should just let the monsters loose so they can save the earth because we're doing a crap job at it. Um, and I think Godzilla versus Kong is like another one of those movies where it kind of the allegory just doesn't go anywhere. I enjoy it because it looks visually interesting and actually looks more visually interesting than most Hollywood blockbusters do nowadays. And I'm excited for Godzilla X Kong New Empire because it's a Godzilla Kong movie. Why wouldn't I'd be excited about that?
But that actually makes me more interested in Godzilla X Kong because I didn't get the kind of movie I wanted out of Godzilla versus Kong. So I've got high hopes for this new movie coming out, and I like what I see so far. So I've got my fingers crossed for that one.
I say, but the way you spoke about Robert Dunham in Dogora, I'd be really interested to know what your take is on Godzilla -1 because the allegory in that is not as it's not as obvious, and it's really only come about just doing reading from like Japanese writers in terms of like where Japan is at the moment in terms of its political landscape, and it really kind of reflects into Godzilla -1 from what I can gather. So they'd be interested to know what your take is on that when you finally get around to watching it. But like to kind of like bring it back to because I mean I could talk about Godzilla for forever, but to kind of bring it back to Dogora, like yeah, the Showa era I think owes Dogora a fate owes Dogora I think because it failed, and if it had succeeded, who knows where Toho might have gone. It's one of those sliding doors moments, and its disjointedness is part of its charm. The jellyfish space monster is an actual really unique design, and for me at least, I got two interesting performances where you only arguably got one.
I mean, I think I got one good performance,
Yeah, that's what I
but
meant. Sorry.
I do think But yeah, I do think the Dunham performance is definitely interesting. I think it is like I don't necessarily I don't like his character, but I think it is like I said, he is something interesting in that movie. Compared to probably a lot of other kaiju films, like like you had said. Um, and yeah, I've heard about that from about other people about -1, and based on what I've seen so far, based on the fact that I do know that it is set in the post-war era, you do have this. I believe the main character is like a former soldier. I think he was a former kamikaze pilot, if I'm not mistaken, or was supposed to be
Yeah.
a kamikaze pilot, I should say. And all of that, you know, that gets me really interested in it. So I am very keen to see this movie and to kind of see like where it goes with those themes, because I love very political Japanese movies. Like, you talked about Shoplifters before. I mean, that is a movie that is extremely political if you know what it's if you understand about Japanese politics. Same thing with like Battle Royale, and those movies are very fascinating to me. So I am so looking forward to that. I keep checking the video news sites here to see when it's going to be released in Japan, because I really want to see it. But anyway, Nick,
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming on. I think that's a pretty good note to kind of close up on. So why don't you tell people where they can find you again?
So I would say I'm on X or Twitter, whatever the hell it's called nowadays. At Nick Chandler. I think it's the same. It's the same one on Blue Sky. I'm not really on these social media sites anymore. I'm really just on there to kind of promote my podcast, which is on these sites is at Keen Atomic, which you can find on pretty much all major podcast networks. My website is superofatomovision.com. And I suppose my most active social media site is Letterboxd, where I am Scorer, which is SK0RA. So give me a follow on there. You can see how many times I've rewatched Ferrari over the next few months.
Okay, very cool. We will have links to all that stuff in the show notes. Again, thanks so much for coming on. This is a fun discussion, even if we had kind of different experiences with this movie, but definitely a fun discussion. I'm glad that I finally got to cross one of the kaiju films off my list, because I've got these and I just haven't had a chance to sit down and watch them yet. So I definitely appreciate you picking something kind of out there, because I don't think anyone else would have picked this movie.
No, I'm happy to have obliged. And if you ever need any guidance on where to go next with Godzilla, then give me a shout. I'll hopefully be able to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely. Well, that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. JapanOnFilm.com is the website, and we are on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Japan on Film on all of those. And also, we are part of the We Made This network, so please make sure to check them out. Stay tuned after the credits to hear what is coming up next on the network. Guys, thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit JapanOnFilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on JapanOnFilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.
Britain. Fish and chips, cups of tea, the smell of the theatrical grease paint, the roar of the football crowd. A diverse nation grappling with its own long, complex history, always with one tongue firmly in cheek. Over the last century, British film has ebbed and flowed, from Ealing comedy to carry-on sauciness, from the British New Wave to Cool Britannia, from Hammer Horror to Hammer Horror again. Forget Hollywood, embrace Pinewood. I'm AJ Black, author, writer and podcaster, and I love British film. Join me in a celebration of its quirks, its successes, its failures, and its unique gems at the Pictures in Britain. Please find and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast player of choice. Find the podcast on Linktree, linktr.ee/@the-pictures in Britain. And check out the Film Stories podcast network at www.filmstories.co.uk. See you at the pictures.